Amongst the thousands upon thousands of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, it's easy to understand how some of them have been forgotten. Now, I've already talked about the rank 3 and rank 4 Exceed monsters that were forgotten, and I very recently talked about the level 8 synchros that were forgotten, but today I wanted to do the next most highly requested, most forgotten top 5 series, level 7 synchro monsters. Now, level 7 synchros are in sort of a weird middle child spot amongst the synchro monsters, because when you think about level 4, 5, and 6 synchro monsters, they're generally pretty low investment. A lot of times you're using a normal summon and then a level 1 tuner to make them, where with the level 8 synchro monsters, you're using a lot more monsters or a lot bigger monsters. Level 7s are sort of in this awkward spot because they don't have quite as powerful effects as level 8 synchro monsters, but they require basically the same investment. This is more interesting because the level 7 synchro monsters that do make it to the competitive scene then have to be worth it, basically. And the ones that we're talking about today have all made that competitive mark, but have fallen to the wayside. Now, this could be for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about in this video, the main ones being either power creep or the decks that they were played in are now irrelevant. Let's get started with one of my personal favorites, Naturia Landoise. Now, Landoise is very similar to Naturia Beast and Naturia Barkion. It's level 7 instead of 5 or 6, and like those monsters, it takes an Earth Tuner and an Earth Non-Tuner. It doesn't have a lot of attack points, only 2350, which is sort of rough, but its effect kind of makes up for that, and its effect is, while this card is face up on the field, you can send one spell card from your hand to the graveyard to negate the activation of an effect monster's effect and destroy it. Now, that's very powerful, even in modern terms. Effect negation has always been good. And I think the real problem with Naturia Landoise is that not only are there not a lot of decks that can make it, possibly Zodiacs could form it with like Scrap Goblin and Zodiac Rat Pierre, but more importantly, when you compare this card to Naturia Beast or Barkion, there's a very big clear difference, and that's that this one-for-one trades for your opponent's effects. And that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but when you compare it to Naturia Beast, which is the most free of all the Naturia Synchros effects, you just mill the top 2 cards of your deck to negate a spell. That's obviously doesn't cost you anything. Naturia Barkion is similar, while you do have to banish things from the graveyard, which is a little more hefty of a price than just milling cards. It still doesn't really matter in the long run, where in Naturia Landoise, you have to actually have a spell card in hand and have one that you want to discard. Now, in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, almost all spell cards in your hand are going to be combo pieces or get you 2 combo pieces, so you probably don't want to keep those in your hand for negations when you can just play a Solemn Strike or a Solemn Warning or literally anything else besides this. Now, it's not a terrible card, but the fact that it's not a free plus makes it just remarkably worse than Naturia Beast and Barkion. I don't know if this card will ever see play again. It was probably best when you were pushing against a whole bunch of monsters, or I mean, you can like use this to negate hand traps, and that's kind of neat, but realistically, this card is not going to see play anymore. Number 4 is Blackwing Armor Master. Now, if you haven't been in the game for very long, you might not believe that not only were Blackwings once the best deck by far, and they actually were for months, Blackwing Armor Master was once one of the most feared turn 1 openings, and what made this card so scary is that it was really hard to kill, couldn't be destroyed by battle, and you don't take battle damage from the card, or battle damage from the battles. But the wedge counters it could put on cards helped you deal with problematic monsters. So not only was it a problematic monster, it also helped you deal with your opponents. Probably the coolest part about this card, and the reason it was so successful, is that it could be made with Gale, which was a Blackwing Tuner monster, and then any level 4 monster that you had. Now, Gale was played in a variety of decks. It was not only a very versatile tuner monster that could deal with cards like Stardust Dragon, it also many times didn't cost your normal summon if you had a Blackwing on the field, and if decks weren't playing any tuners, they were at least playing a couple copies of Gale. It was definitely the go-to pick for a lot of decks that otherwise would not be playing any synchro monsters. And you could make like Black Rose Dragon and, of course, Blackwing Armor Master, which, while it didn't blow up the entire field, it did deal with specific cards and could help you deal a ton of damage through battle. This card isn't really relevant anymore, mainly because, sort of like in the last video with level 8 synchros I talked about, like Thought Ruler Archfiend, this card doesn't have any protection against card effects. Now, back in the day, especially when this card was out, having the protection from battle was good enough. There wasn't nearly as much destruction around, but nowadays, I mean, you just summon this and it gets popped by Trident, or negated by Strike, or a whole slew of other things, Regeki, Dark Hole, Kaijus, you name it. And I don't think we're ever going to see Armor Master again, but while it was in the game and while it was very good, man, it was certainly annoying, that's for sure. Coming in at number 3, we have Karakuri Shogun Model 00 Blu-ray, and Karakuris were in a weird spot for a while. I know I said that about the 5th one, but Karakuris were always that deck that was sort of off the radar, but snuck in there. Players like Desmond Johnson really popularized the strategy, and people kept making advancements with it. Early versions of the deck would use Instant Fusion and Cyber Dragon and Solar Windjammer to put a level 5 non-tuner machine monster on the field, and then you could use your tuner monsters to make the Karakuri synchro monsters and just totally obliterate your opponent. Now, Blu-ray was really important because it could change battle positions, which then could... So the play was that you could summon this and then make 2 of the level 8 Karakuri synchro, and then switch this guy to attack position with its own effect, and then you would draw multiple cards off the level 8 synchro. We also saw it very briefly in some Dragon Ruler decks. You could make this with any of your level 1 tuner monsters like Effect Veiler or Dragoonity Corseska, and then you could synchro those tuner monsters with your 2 Dracosack tokens. Now, that might not seem super relevant, except that this thing could switch the Dracosack tokens on your opponent's side of the field to attack position, and then you could do a whole bunch of damage to them, and that was actually a pretty cheesy play, but a lot of people used it. You then could banish it from your graveyard to summon back a Redox, if that was super relevant. Karakuris are not looking so hot with Link summoning out, and I don't think that Karakuris will ever be popular unless they come up with a Karakuri Link monster that does basically the same thing that Synchro monsters do. But for a long time, and even in like Geargia, Karakuri, which is a very popular deck back in the day, 2014, even that deck played this card very successfully, just with a very small amount of actual Karakuri monsters, but definitely the Synchro monsters were the most important there. I don't think this card does enough to be competitive anymore, but back in the day, it was definitely one of the biggest OTK enablers for a variety of Karakuri variants. Number 2 is a card that was quite expensive up until the only reprint that it's seen, which is in the Legendary Collection, Ancient Sacred Wyvern. Now, this card has a very, very straightforward effect. It just gains attack when there's a life point deficit, and also, when it's destroyed by battle since the graveyard, you can pay 1,000 life points, special summon this card, so it has sort of a built-in revival effect. Now, that revival effect, of course, does take away from the actual attack points of it, but this thing was definitely a game finisher. If you weren't using it to kill your opponent on the spot, you were putting them in a very tough position where either they lost to its huge attack or tried to run it over multiple times to get it down to a more reasonable attack. And I'd say in most cases, the times that you were summoning an Ancient Sacred Wyvern, you were just killing your opponent right then and there. The only downside of Ancient Sacred Wyvern, and probably the only reason that it didn't find its way on the Forbidden Limited list, is because it does take a light tuner monster. It's not just completely generic, and I do fully believe that if that restriction wasn't there, this card would have been on the Forbidden Limited list. It was really silly in the few decks that could play it, and I can't even imagine every deck having access to the card. I would think that it'd be a very similar situation to Darkstrike Fighter, a card that just enabled a ton of really stupid OTKs, and luckily it was restricted just to light decks or decks that could play light tuners. Even still though, it snuck in a lot of wins that were probably not winnable without this card, especially back in the day when, once again, there wasn't so much spot removal to get rid of this, and a lot of the times you just couldn't deal with Ancient Sacred Wyvern. Now, the number 1 pick here, in my mind, it had only been used once in recent years, and that was in Shadal's, and that was in the early version of Shadal's, and that is Arcanite Magician. Now, if you don't know what this card does, when you summon it, you put 2 counters on it, then it gains 1,000 attack for each of those spell counters, and you can remove one of those counters, not once per turn at all, to blow up a card your opponent controls. Now, that's really cool. And the other cool thing is that it can actually remove spell counters from anywhere on the field. Now, there's not a ton of different spell counter based decks, but for the people that were playing some silly wombo combo spellcaster decks with spell counters, this was a way to potentially blow up an entire field. But in most cases, people were using this with Falco and Beast to summon it, and then you could blow up 2 cards. Not super great, but definitely better in a lot of cases than summoning Black Ghost Dragon, just because it didn't blow up your own field. Now, the problem with this card is that it has 0 protection, and it can't actually blow up anything right when you summon it, because you have to wait for the effect not only to trigger, but then you have to actually activate the effect to blow up stuff, giving your opponent 2 opportunities to negate it. Either when you summon it, they could just Solemn Strike it, or Fiendish Chain it even. I mean, it's useless without the spell counters, which is its biggest downfall. Also, after you've blown up 2 things, it goes down to 400 attack points, which isn't super great. The only benefit of this card over Black Ghost Dragon is that it doesn't blow up your own stuff, but in a lot of ways that doesn't really matter too much, considering you need a non-tuner spellcaster type monster to summon this. Although, unlike Ancient Sacred Wyvern, I would say that that is not what's keeping this card back. It's mainly just the fact that it doesn't do enough proactive things, and it just has too little attack to make a big difference. You have to have something else next to this card, and I'd say it's the most forgotten level 7 Synchro, because it seemed like for a while this card was quite expensive. Until the Gold Series reprint, it actually was only a super rare, and it was pretty hard to come by, especially when Shaddoll's first came out. It was sort of the go-to level 7 Synchro monster, but I haven't seen it in years at this point. It's been years since Shaddoll's have been around, which is weird to think about. It wasn't even used in like the later versions of Shaddoll's, just the very early versions before we had Norden or a lot of the Shaddoll Shaddoll fusion monsters. Sorry, and I don't know. I don't think we'll ever see this card again. There's been some spellcaster decks, and maybe Dark Magician plays this. I don't think so, though. It's awkward level design and weird effect make it not a must pick for anyone that's playing spellcasters. But I don't think it'll ever come up again, even though it has seen some competitive success in the past, especially when it first came out and when Shaddoll's came out. But anyway, that is my top 5 list of the most forgotten level 7 Synchro monsters. If there's any that I forgot, put them in the comments below. You guys always like letting me know. And I do want to mention briefly, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but the reason that Darkstrike Fighter isn't on this list, I know I mentioned it during Ancient Sacred Wyvern's entry, but the reason that Darkstrike Fighter is on the list is because it's sort of unfair to put a card that got eroded. The only reason Darkstrike Fighter is forgettable is because it's so god-awful right now. But certainly if it was currently banned with its old effect, or if it was back with its old effect, you would remember it. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. Bye.